Good evening and welcome to the September 20th, 2021 work session of the Worcester City Board of Education. Amy, if you would call the roll.
Mrs. Herman.
Here.
Mr. Stabneser.
Here.
Dr. Boone.
Here.
Dr. Knappich.
Here.
Ms. Shantz.
Here. Okay. We're looking at the new business, the consent agenda for the superintendent, but I think we're moving everything to...
Yeah, we have no, at this point, because
Nothing.
we're back to, the regular school year, we will, unless a significant reason that I would explain, we will not do personnel at the work sessions.
Okay. So we're moving that to regular session. So we go to reports 3.01 and we have a transportation update from Mr. Tudor.
All right. Thank you, Madam President. So basically wanted to kind of discuss probably what you've seen maybe here at Worcester, and also what you've probably seen in the news in the state and really around the country. Our transportation, we do continue to have shortages in terms of the number of drivers that are needed. And really what I mean by that is not just in our regular routes that pick up and drop off each day, but the number of trips that we have after school and different things. You need more than just your regular route drivers to do that efficiently. The first thing I would say is our drivers have been phenomenal. They are picking up extra trips on a regular basis. They're willing to work extra. They're helping brainstorm in the department. It's not a lack at all on our current employees, but the reality is we could use more drivers. So the first thing I'd like to say is just a reminder that if you are interested in driving a school bus, we'd love to talk with you. It doesn't have to be as a full-time driver. It could be as a substitute that's just wanting to pick up some extra hours every once in a while, but it's definitely a need here in Worcester as well.
Dave, yeah, you have to have your CDL to do that.
Yes. Now, you do have to have your, that's right, Dr. Knappich, you do have to have your CDL. We will provide the training for that.
Okay.
So the negative is you could tell us you're ready to drive, and boy, we'd love to have you, but it doesn't work that easily, but we do have the resources to get you certified to drive. We actually were able to train and hire a new driver that will be starting this week that would be on our board agenda next week for a retroactive start date. So it does work.
Okay. About how much time does the training take?
It kind of depends on how quickly you
Learn.
Yes,
Okay.
And not only learn, but how
can
much you're
produce
able to,
skills.
spend the time doing it. And some of that also depends on our availability of our onboard instructors. The more onboard instructors we have and their
Right.
ability also helps that as well.
Okay.
So yes, obviously we need more drivers, but we are being able to manage with our current routes. But what I wanted to mention to you today is, some parents, primarily athletic and band parents, have probably noticed this the most. We're able to fulfill most of our needs during the day with routes and special ed, and that's wonderful. Where we have run into the most challenges with some of the shortages of drivers is those early afternoon trips that leave prior to 4:15. Because by 4:15, all of our regular drivers are available, and many of them are willing to help, at different times, and we have plenty to choose from. But when you have a trip that needs to leave at 2 o'clock because it's going to get dark before they finish, or just when it starts, those have become difficult. So one of the reasons I wanted to mention this tonight is that our athletic department specifically is going to try to look to reschedule things that can be rescheduled to later on in the evening. So for example, maybe a freshman football game was scheduled to start at 5 o'clock and they needed to leave at 3:15, 3:30. Move that to 6 o'clock, and it's probably manageable for us to get a driver to do that. So we will be doing that with things that we can. Obviously, there's no lights on a golf course, so there are certain sports that we can't do that with. But just if parents, if you start getting those calls or you start seeing that there's been some changes to those schedules, that's really the reason why. Again, we have enough drivers to get to and from school. we're definitely tweaking things sometimes, and our bus department is doubling up routes when needed, or picking up and doing some really creative things, but we're fine. It's just those after school things that have been the most challenging. So I just felt like that was something that I know that has been kind of a discussion point for parents. I know it, and at times probably frustrating, and I understand that. So I wanted to mention that tonight.
Will that also affect the spring schedule or spring sports?
For sure. We're, right now we're focusing on fall with this, but the reality is this is not a fall only issue. Yeah. There's also been, for example, the OCC they had their athletic directors meeting last week, and they were talking about they're actually likely, a lot of times we do triple headers with basketball, girls and boys in the winter. So, that means that you've got a game starting at 4:30, likely going to move freshman games to their own night at a later time for that exact reason, because everybody in the OCC is dealing with this. So,
Yeah. Not just us.
no, there's been states that have called in the National Guard.
Oh, geez.
Governor DeWine has discussed that. I don't know if that will happen or not. Yeah. And is COVID a part of the reason for this? Sure. But in general, we know that staffing is a challenge for so many businesses right now. I mean, you can go anywhere and you recognize that,
Right.
and we're no exception.
Well, and this is a good time, too, to give a shout out to our transportation department and how hard they work, and they're not recognized enough. We don't verbally praise them enough, and they take a lot of heat. I mean, I had 2 kids in school. I know when the bus was late, I was panicking. I was one of those moms. But it just love your bus drivers. They've got a tough job, and without them, we couldn't run school. Yep. So we need to make sure that they feel the love. Yes. So, okay, moving on to, thank you for that, Mr. Tudor, and moving on to your next song and dance.
Yes.
3.02, we're going to talk about master planning and Edgewood Reno updates. So
yeah, a lot of exciting things to talk about here. So first, it would have been 2 weeks ago, I think Wednesday, I did another presentation on kind of the options of master planning. Appreciated the people that came, and hopefully some other people watched that online. I'll be honest, we didn't have as many people here as I probably would have loved to have. And so I think part of my conversation tonight, I want to talk about where we are with master planning and some things with Edgewood, but I think also as a group, we need to discuss where we go from here in our process. So first talking about that process, and then I can go into the details that we've talked about. So, but prior to my arrival, Dr. Teffs solicited feedback from the community. He did a couple presentations. I think one was recorded, and I know he went around to all of the schools to a staff meeting to kind of get their feedback. Then obviously we had, the great transition this summer where we had so many people that were new, and then I did a couple presentations, but and then obviously we've had COVID, and there's just been a lot of things that have taken the forefront of a lot of families and probably their attention. And so, now here we are, we've done 2 more presentations. And I've appreciated the feedback, and you can see the survey results pretty, they're pretty clear, and I can talk about that in a minute. But really, where do we go from here? Technically, the plan that was kind of carried forth from prior to my arrival, and it was a good plan, was, do these presentations, and then after that, that's kind of, that's the feedback time, and then use our master planning BAC subcommittee. So it's made up of people from the community, teachers, business people, former educators, a couple administrators, to kind of work through that feedback and hopefully get to a point where we could present one master plan that we would then use when the time is right. I guess my question to you tonight is, do we need to acquire some more feedback? The big conversation points are, I think one is pretty unanimous, or most people agree with, is we need to try to continue to have something at Cornerstone. I don't know what that is, but just a presence on the south side of town is important. And then the other conversation piece really revolves around neighborhood versus grade level elementary schools, and then the grade configuration of your middle school, high school. Okay, so, overall, our current feedback, which again is kind of from a few months ago overall, I mean, we've been welcoming more, but we just haven't had it a lot lately, is the community, not by a major margin, but overall does prefer neighborhood elementary schools. Staff overwhelmingly supports grade level schools. Not like every single one, but it's pretty strong. Grade level schools do a lot with collaboration. It allows you to work with all the people that teach similar things to you. There is economies of scale there, but neighborhood schools also are a big part of the community. So that's really kind of the points that I think would have to continue to be considered.
When you say grade level schools, is the assumption that the majority of those buildings are on one campus? Or is that a whole separate issue?
So, well, I think as many as makes sense would probably be on the high school campus, which is part of the second part I'll talk about once we, when I kind of say where we are with some master planning, that regardless of how we configure it, we'd want to talk through. But I don't believe every building would.
So I just wonder if, when I looked through the ABC, I think there was 3 major options. I had assumed that if the current model of neighborhood schools was not continued, that meant all neighborhood schools would be vacant with the exception of Cornerstone because of that notation. And if that's not necessarily the case, if some of those neighborhood schools would continue to be used, but in a different configuration, that might need some clarification. For example, if first and second were all where Keene is now, it's probably not a big enough building. But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I had assumed that if the current model went away, that meant those buildings would no longer be used in the community.
I do think that's probably correct.
That is safe.
I think
Okay.
once we do develop a master plan and then actually decide that it's time to implement it, which is a whole second conversation, I do believe that it will be probably not using Parkview, Melrose, or Keene anymore.
Okay.
For us, does that mean that nobody in the community, because, you look at Layton, and Layton's been used, I want to say Pittsburgh Avenue, that dates me. Lincoln Way is used by another agency. So would that be a possibility too? So that people in the community can start to think ahead, when that happens, we might be interested in
Yeah,
that
of course.
building.
We would definitely, want to, sell those at the right time to people in the community, unless the master
Unless we
plan
decide
determined that we're going to use that
we need that land,
space
right.
to build on, which I don't know if we're far enough along to make that decision.
Mr. Tudor, can you review the state's timetable as it relates to how much money is at stake?
Yes.
And where we're at?
Yeah, so we are on the list with the OFCC. So the OFCC is the kind of funding partner for school districts to build new facilities. We are on the list because when they came and did a evaluation, they felt that every building but the high school to renovate to an appropriate level for 21st century learning would be more than 2/3 the cost of a rebuild. So when you do that, at that point, they say you are eligible for funding. So they put you on the list. Now, the reality is that it takes a while for your number to come up, okay? We could be up to 10 years away from that. It really kind of depends on somewhat their funding, but it definitely goes in order. So we don't get that right away. So one thing we'll have to consider at the right time is there's something called ELP, or expedited local financing, where we could decide that it's time to build buildings, and our community would support that. OFCC isn't going to give us that money right away. They're going to give us their money when our number comes up. So when it's expedited, what that means is so let's say we did a $50 million project and they are going to give us 30%, which by the way is what our percentage is. So 30 cents of every dollar is going to be provided for whatever we determine this project is when we do it, would be provided by OFCC. They would give us 30% of that. But they won't give it to us until our number comes up. So one thing that could happen is you could build a few buildings, then our number comes up, they give us the money, and that would pay for another building. As you remember, we've talked some about Edgewood and how this kind of factors in. It's because the reality is this is not a simple, here's what we're going to do. Now we're going to ask the community, and then bam, we're going to build 4 buildings all at once. It's a process of time. So, but yes, the OFCC has recommended us, and we are on the list. But it's at least 5 years away.
And just for clarity's sake, the OFCC is the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission.
Thank you, Sue.
And this
Yep.
is what they do all the time. They look at all of the school districts in the state and assess the viability of their buildings. So, and we went through the process 3 years ago?
Yeah.
3 years ago
3 years
now.
ago.
Yeah, they came in and looked at all of our buildings. So.
And also, you totally can wait until your number comes up to start funding. That's just not expedited, and that's, again, I think the first step is, what's our master plan? How do we want to make sure that in 30 years we have set our school district up to be successful from a facility standpoint for the next 30 years? I would argue significantly that 30 years ago, a master plan was put together that's put us here today. Right? By moving Cornerstone to an elementary school, by building this high school the way it did, which, yes, we've done some renovations on, but still is, I think, a very modern school, and it's 28 years old. That's really what our goal is that we think ahead so that we can do the same.
Gabe, I have a question on these different types of configurations, whether it's neighborhood or grade level. I'm sure there's discussion about what pedagogically makes sense, and then, as far as extracurriculars and co-curriculars and those kinds of things, is there, where should I get more information about that?
So, I don't think we have anything specifically on the website about that, but those are great questions. And so I think it leads to a part of what my recommendation might be. So I'm not an expert on master planning. I mean, I have some thoughts, but the architectural firm that we're working with, GPD, is. And Mr. King, who is kind of our lead architect, can lead really good conversation about things like that. Because really master planning is what are the needs of the community? What are the wants of the community? What defines the community? And so my suggestion is that we reach back. So a lot of times, not right or wrong, those master planning type sessions and kind of that whole process of getting to the point of a plan is not led by the superintendent. I'm, of course, there, and I would have input just like any other community member, but, GPD doesn't have any skin in the game other than to make sure that we do what's best for our community. Right? And so I would partly say that's going to be my recommendation, I think, for you tonight, is that we meet with them again and kind of discuss how we ensure that we're going to get good feedback before we move. I want to move as fast as we need to, but I don't want to move too fast and miss out on conversation that needs to happen. So, my suggestion is that I meet with him again and come to you with maybe a plan for some additional feedback, and maybe some of that is some community involvement are leading through him. To answer your specific question, grade level schools provides more collaboration. It is easier for co-curriculars. You don't have a drama club at 4 elementaries, you have it at 1. I mean, there's a lot of advantages, but there is advantages to neighborhood schools, as well. And in the end, we want our community, whatever it is, needs to define our community and be supported by our community.
And I think it's interesting, but with the move to the grade level schools that we see, Gabe has said that Wadsworth just went through this, how long ago? Just a couple
2012,
years ago.
they
Yeah.
built schools.
And they
had this
went with
conversation.
community schools. So, there's right in our backyard, a district that's, within our wheelhouse to do some checking on how it's working for them. And it was as a result of public input, correct?
Yeah, the public input kind of drove it to,
Yeah.
they felt that they wanted to stick with neighborhood schools. And so
Oh.
that changed, obviously, the levy a little bit.
Right.
But was what the community wanted.
Yeah, and that should be a heads up to our people. We want to know what the voters want. And the only way we're going to know is if you tell us, if you show up, if you fill out these questionnaires that we send out. In order to we don't want to make these decisions by ourselves. We're not presuming to live in a vacuum, in a, school board vacuum. So
But I
let
think
us
it's a good idea to
know.
get additional feedback.
Oh, I
Yeah,
do
I
too.
think that would be helpful because I think what happens a lot in strategic planning, and I'm not suggesting the feedback we have received is not helpful, but I feel like a lot of times organizations start with the solution and then try and define the problem. So the solution is, what types of buildings do we want? Well, what problem are we trying to solve? Is it that we need better collaboration amongst building staffs? Is it to make it more convenient for parents to have all their kids in one place? Like what are the problems or the needs? And then you craft the solution to that.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe this gentleman that you mentioned could help us identify and help our community identify what those needs are, and then craft the answer,
I
the
think
best solution.
the answer to that question is multifactorial. And it's going to depend on who you ask.
Who you
Yeah,
ask, right?
absolutely. Because
Right.
when you talk to the teachers, you're going to get a different view because of collaboration. And I get that as a former teacher, I get that. But also having grown up in this community with neighborhood schools, I get that too.
Well, that's what I'm
So-
thinking of, like if you ask, like at the sessions we've done, we've asked for feedback. Well, what do I know? I know neighborhood schools. And I'm not a teacher, a school teacher, and so I don't understand the implications of a different configuration. So I'm going to think neighborhood schools are probably the best
Right.
route to go.
Right.
So I feel like, I don't know, I think it's definitely important to keep in mind who you're asking, but also helping people clarify exactly what they think
Yeah.
we really need.
Yeah.
So,
I think that was a good point. Identify the problem first and then seek for a solution instead of offering the solution and building the problem around it. So, I mean, that's a good point.
I can imagine a lot of parents would ask about busing. So,
Yeah.
my kiddo walks from Northwestern to, let's say, either Parkview or Cornerstone. But now if he's heading up to the high school, what's that trip, round trip? How much time is that? It'd be interesting. I mean, you can't really guess if it's grade level schools. That's a tough one because we don't know how those have been identified. So some busing. So I think the change goes to both of those choices take walking away, except if you by chance happen to live near where the grade level is.
that your kid's in.
Right.
Yeah.
And so busing has to increase.
Yeah.
Right.
And if I'm a parent, I might want to know how long that might add to my kid's day,
Yeah.
especially if, let's say we're in the Lincoln Way area and I'm going up to the high school. That could add a bit. So, I mean, I don't know if there's the sense of it'd be interesting to have an estimation, because I don't really know how long the bus takes. I know the transportation department, who we can, as we shouted out earlier, it'd be interesting to say, what's a bus, I don't know how long a trip would be. Let's say it's from Cornerstone up to the high school. If that's 7 minutes, that doesn't sound as bad as 22. A random number. And I think some idea about how long my kid might be in the bus, I think a parent would want to know that.
Yeah.
It's funny, you're talking about the bus times, and when I was a kid, this dates me, but some people listening might remember, when I was in school, in elementary, we had 9 elementaries here in Worcester. We had no buses. There were no buses. And then when on up to the high school, if you lived far enough away, you could catch the city bus to get to school. So it was, you know, I mean, that's what the older adults in our town grew up with. That's what their kids experienced and saw. So it really is, I mean, when I look at it in my years of existence here, my perspective, things have changed so dramatically. And this makes for a really interesting discussion for me, given my history. So, yeah.
Well, I think, you know, I think selfishly that'll be beneficial for me as well.
Yeah.
You know, as I kind of coming in midway through, I think kind of, I don't believe we're starting over. I think that's clear to say. We're not starting over, but I think we're just kind of re-engaging a little bit, and before we kind of, you know, kind of take off.
Yeah.
I just think that that's really important. So I'll kind of follow up on that, and I'll provide an update, you know, either next week or at the next work session, depending on how quickly we can get some things scheduled and start kind of having some conversation.
I think it would be interesting, too, to have their perspective, the GPD folks, on you're missing this, you're missing that, you know, if they can kind of gap analysis on, on the feedback we've received so far.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, that's good.
And one thing, being on the Safety and Security Committee.
That's a good point.
And I'm not proponent of saying, one discussion was less schools is safer, per se, with being able to cover that. So I remember that was it wasn't someone's declaration of the right situation, but it was a perspective that I hadn't thought of and thought, you know, it's interesting to say. Let's say a campus school occurs at the high school. There's one entrance and whatever. There's a way that you can make a safety protocol or way in and out that is easier than 4 schools. So just some things to consider. Because if we actually look at the cost of even putting vestibules, it's prohibitive to most of the schools, as we have tried here at the high school.
Yes.
So, so that's some interesting ideas, because I know parents are concerned.
Yeah.
And we know that no matter what's built, it will include different safety. I can't, I
Right.
haven't seen, but I know that it's probably part and parcel with any new plan.
Yeah, very good, very true.
Yep. Okay.
All right.
Good discussion.
So I'm sorry, so I'm not quite done yet. But,
Okay,
I know,
okay.
I didn't mean to hog this whole meeting.
No, that's fine. You just go for it.
Yeah. So I do want to mention
this is important.
some kind of exciting stuff with the master plan. Regardless of where we land on some of these things that we're talking about, there's been a lot of developments that lately that I think benefit the school and also benefit the city, and really just kind of everyone involved. So you can see it on, you guys probably can't see it well because it's pretty bright, but for those of you watching at home, you'll be able to see that I've got a picture here of the campus. And so we are officially at this point, you know, very, very supportive of this development and land swap that I think benefits a lot of different people involved. So I wanted to just take a minute to explain that to you. So we own the land to the south of Oldman, okay? All of that from Keene all the way to Oak Hill. We actually own that because of very gracious, you know, generosity from the Noble Foundation a few years ago. Recently, the city, one of the things they talk about regularly is their need for housing. As you guys see, they have a lot of, our industry is growing, and we have a growing population, which is very exciting for a city where in Northeast Ohio, which does not happen often, but finding quality places for people to live is becoming more difficult. So an investor group came, this was definitely prior to my time, and had interest in property, you know, on the north end near the high school. And to make a long story short, what has kind of landed as a development option is that there is a developer that wants to develop on the west side of the football field of Keene. So we still have the football field, but their tree line, everything on the west side of that tree line up to the ravine there, the ravine at Oak Hill. This developer is interested in putting some senior, so 55 and older, like small condo type, but in single family homes, and a larger apartment complex that would be prevailing rate, not subsidized. You might even ask, well, 55 and older, they probably don't have kids. Well, but the reality is they move from other places, and then their homes now are available for families. So in doing that, that's our land. The agreement, in a nutshell, is that there is a landowner that would be the parcel closer to Oak Hill here that is willing to sell. So technically, he would get proceeds from Lemon and Lemon, the developer. And then the Noble Foundation plans to, they would, in this land swap, they buy that land. And in the long run, this whole big, almost perfect square becomes the school district. So the land closer to Commerce Parkway is the Noble Foundation's currently. They bought it, again, they're so gracious. What a great town we live in. Not a lot of places have this kind of thing. They bought it with the idea that it would likely be used for schools someday. So that area would probably fit a building. But the reality is, for no money, because technically we're giving up land. Yes, we're giving up something. We would get two areas right there together where we would be able to build on. The community gets housing that they need, and it's very beneficial. You remember a few months ago, we talked about this little number 1 here, that little parcel of land. We bought that for the soccer field egress, but really also that gives us egress to this entire area. So it was a really important piece for us. So I think it's important to know that that's going to Planning Commission at this point. Ms. Furlong, do you have the picture of the development too? So you can kind of see some of the pictures of what they have planned there. So that goes to Planning Commission. And I think at this point, it's fair for us to say that as a school district, we support this. It's a benefit to us and the community. And so, obviously, other people have to decide if this is the right thing. And, there's a lot of, things at stake for that. But if this works out, I think it's definitely something that we really get a lot out of. Also, with that whole development, there is a potential for a TIF, which is a tax incremental financing, which basically means all the landowners around, which would include the school, which would include the new development, the money would be pooled together to pay for infrastructure improvements, which are desperately needed as well. Probably roundabouts or more roads there at Oak Hill and Oldman, and probably at Milltown, a new sewer line, which just putting a new sewer line from the road, from where it is on Oak Hill to a new building could cost up to $1 million. I mean, just because of the amount of digging and things. So there is a lot of positives to this. So I just thought that was something that I wanted to share. I shared it with our BAC. We had our full meeting the other day, and I think at this point we're very supportive of this project if the city and the developers feel like it should move forward.
Do we have any timeline on how long does it take when it goes to the Planning Commission? It could take months.
They could decide at the meeting,
okay.
or they could
examine
have more.
Okay.
I think they are requesting a traffic study,
okay.
Which that would make sense with that area out there. So those kind of things can delay that a little bit.
Yeah.
Could someone, I'm very geographically
Challenged.
challenged.
Join the club.
So I need landmarks here, sorry?
That's Lowe's.
This is north.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is Fawless Field. There's Alice Noble Ice Rink.
Okay.
And then this is Oldman.
Yeah.
And then that's Oak Hill. Oldman
Yeah.
it's like.
Oldman's over
Rose and
there.
Oldman, and then
Yeah.
Oak Hill's up top.
Okay. Thank you.
There's some houses and like that church
Yeah.
and things like that are real close to Oak Hill. We would basically, the land from that over to the high school would become a part of it.
Okay.
And I think Lemon and Lemon have been a really good partner for Worcester.
Yeah.
They've done some great investment here.
Yeah. So the only other thing I have, sorry again,
No,
man,
don't
but it's
apologize.
exciting stuff, right?
Don't apologize.
Is speaking of Edgewood, again, we've talked about how they are a part of the master plan. I do believe that for a while they will be, if not, who knows where this all ends. But Not every day do you get, $6 million from the federal
state,
government
yeah.
to spend on air quality and other things. And so I know that air conditioning Edgewood has been a possibility even in the past. So it does look very feasible at this point. Next week, as I'll talk about, briefly in a minute when it's when I go through the agenda, we're kind of to the point where we're ready to officially acquire the services of BSHM, their architectural firm, as they would kind of drive, the Edgewood air conditioning and also a small piece of roof at the high school for a project next year. And then, shortly after, we'd probably start looking at getting a CMR, our construction manager at risk, which really becomes the point person that runs the project. So I guess my summary is today to you is that mechanical engineer thinks it's very feasible. It might be a 2-year project, but there's a lot of it that could probably be done in year 1 because we actually have multiple different kinds of heating units in the building. There is wall units, and then there's rooftop units. They're not all the same, and so you can kind of work on 2 things at once. So just wanted to share that with you, and you'll see BSHM soon on our board agenda, and then after we do our request for proposals, there'll be a selection process, and then at some point you'll see a construction manager at risk as well that would help us really start to define the project and get our maximum guaranteed price and things like that. So
It's exciting. Any questions or?
No, it's been some great planning meetings,
Yes.
and I wish I could share, because the mechanical engineer shared the zones. If you looked at Edgewood, it's kind of in zones. And the whole idea would be tackle some of the bigger zones first. So we're hitting the larger classrooms. What's nice is the second and first floor are stacked, so there's an area that could be hit really quickly if we imagine this is occurring in stages. And the intention is to try and do as much and cover as much quicker. And I say that I really don't know what it's like to predict construction. I don't, with all that's going on. But the idea is seeing if phase 1 or 2 could be done next year. Who knows? But trying to hit the bigger spots, and then leaving some other parts to discuss about the music room and the gym and things like that later. But it was kind of nice to see it broken up and say, actually, this isn't that tough to do this spot, and then the other ones require different things, but more doable than.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
And we're really talking about this so much right now because if you want to effectively do a project next summer in about an 8-week
start
window,
now.
you have to do your planning and
Yeah.
secure things and actually even buy product well before next summer.
Yeah, yeah.
Are we on to the proposal yet? I just had a couple of questions about it.
Not yet.
Okay, sorry.
We're
My
moving
bad.
there right now. So moving on to the regular superintendent's agenda, 4.01. We need a motion to approve the first reading of a proposal from BSHM for 2022 capital improvements.
So moved. No, seconded.
All right. So time for discussion, so.
So my
Oh, no,
question-
do we vote on the motion?
Yeah.
No, we need to discuss
Yeah,
before we
discuss
vote.
before you vote on it.
My question is, I know it excludes the remediation of hazardous materials. Are we expecting to run into that in Edgewood?
I was wondering about that too.
It was like 1960, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
What did you say, Dan?
Schools were at 1960.
early 60s, yeah.
There's
So
always a
could be
chance, some of those
asbestos.
tiles, but they could have been replaced that. We didn't,
He did not mention it in our discussion, but that doesn't mean, especially at that age
Yeah.
level, that we couldn't have that
Okay.
impact.
I just was wondering if we should
yeah.
That would
kind
not
of think about
be
that.
hard to figure out sooner rather than
Yes.
later.
Yeah, and the basics of this, it's a percentage, and then as the project develops, grows or shrinks, the percentage does not change in these fees. And this is just first reading. I'll bring this back to you as well next week. We wanted to, if possible, if with your approval, have it done by the end of September, but I wanted time for you guys to really look it over.
Any other questions? Okay, Amy, if you would call the roll.
Ms. Shantz?
Yes.
Dr. Knappich,
Yes.
Dr. Boone.
Yes.
Mr. Stabnezer,
Yes.
Mrs. Herman.
Yes. All right, moving on to 5.01, I need a motion to suspend
So
Robert's
moved.
Rules of Order.
Seconded.
Okay. Amy, if you would call the roll.
Dr. Knappich,
Yes.
Dr. Boone.
Yes.
Mrs. Herman.
Yes.
Mr. Stabnezer.
Yes.
Ms. Shawnees.
Yes.
We are in work session. So if we look at 6.01, we have listed the review of the September 28th, 2021 board agenda, and then there are a couple other issues that we want to discuss too. So go ahead
Yes.
go ahead with the agenda and then we'll catch up.
We will have student recognition next week. Excited to get that started again. That's when you really feel like school's back in session and getting the kids here. With that, I do have a recommendation for us. We recognize 2 students per building. When you think of this room, and by the time mom and dad comes and maybe grandma and grandpa, this room would fill up pretty quickly. And also, on a regular basis, and I'm glad we do get public participation and people wanting to come to the meeting. And so I'm a little concerned that in this room, it would be a little tight, kind of with the dynamics going on right now with COVID. So my recommendation is that starting next week, we start having our board meetings in the PAC, in the Performing Arts Center. My recommendation, we just keep them there, because it's difficult to move the equipment. Our
Right.
tech department is able and willing to do it, but my recommendation is we would just put it over there until we feel that we can come back over here without issues kind of related to the pandemic. Hopefully that's a short couple months. It could be a while. I don't know that answer.
So we'd have work sessions there also?
Yes.
Okay, so everything moves to the PAC?
Yeah,
for-
just simply
starting next
because of the
week.
recording
Yeah,
standpoint.
yeah, because we don't want to
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
have you guys moving all that stuff every time we turn around.
So yeah, I think that would be, that's the only thing that would change, but I just think that gives a lot more room for people to spread out and people can feel comfortable regardless of where they're kind of at in the pandemic to come.
I have a question for Becky on, when we had our last meeting in the PAC, a few years ago, the sound was absolutely terrible. Have we worked that out? I mean, it was hard for us to hear each other. It was so, yeah, I sat next to Mike Knappich, never mind. And I just wondered if we have that issue worked out.
There was a renovation done in the PAC,
Okay.
and sound was included. in
Okay,
that.
so
And,
that's what,
And then we will also bring all of the same equipment. And so for the people
Okay.
who are in YouTube land, they will hear directly from your mic
okay.
straight to there. So
Okay,
we'll
that
be
sounds
set.
good. Okay, thank you.
I
Thank you.
recently went to a band parent meeting that was there that used the sound system, and it
And
was
everything
very
was
easy
good.
to hear.
That's good, that's good. Yeah, that was an interesting meeting.
But actually, the issue is we couldn't hear.
Yeah,
Oh, you couldn't hear.
We couldn't hear each other. It was really.
was a real quick
it was,
meeting, yeah.
challenging, to say the least. Yeah, it was, so.
So if you guys are good with that, I don't know that needs an actual
Yeah,
motion.
no,
I'll
that
just make,
sounds
Sounds
good.
great.
we'll make the announcement and put it on our, because we're sending out our student letters and stuff to the
Yep.
families, so we'll get all that taken care of. Reports, actually, we will have a report. We'll do my monthly COVID report. So I will discuss, some of our numbers, some of the things we're seeing in the classroom, just some basic observations. And then I would say regardless of how that report goes, and then whatever your decision is, there should be an action item for you guys to clarify your COVID protocols for the month of October until the next meeting. So
That sounds
we'll put those things on there as well.
That sounds like a plan. So that's it? We don't,
Well, I know there's
Or
some,
anything else?
well, we'll have a little personnel,
Okay.
just some long-term leaves and we had some classified employments and some generals club workers. And then I'll let Amy go too. I really won't hog this the whole time, Amy, but on our regular agenda, we have some contracts. We have a couple things just of note. Student handbooks, the elementary handbooks are on there. Remember, we tabled those last time just to have time for review. There'll be the second reading for BSHM. Speech and debate has an overnight trip. You guys approve overnight trips. So they have a couple, just as they compete around the state. There's several agreements on here between us and other school systems. I think I want you to know those are all because of court placements. Okay, so if
what placements?
court placements. So if we have foster children in our district, or if our kids are sent out, there's agreements for pay for those kind of things. So these are not, unlike, when we talked about like the Learner Academy and some of those autism schools and things that we did, over the summer, which are an IEP team decision, but a decision by the district and the IEP team. These really are kind of out of our control, but any type we have a contract, I always put it in here for your approval. We have an MOU for OTES 2.0, which is the new evaluation system for teachers. We really kind of tried to do that as similar to 1.0 as possible. And just kind of get a feel for it with the union as everybody's trying to learn it for new. This is required. We had to do a MOU to update to the 2.0 system, which is now what teachers are evaluated with. An MOU with 180, kind of the same as we always do for their services, and then they also do the survey, the youth assessment survey. And then lastly, and we could have, there could be more things added, but I don't want to anticipate a lot. Esports club at Worcester High School. So there is
Esports.
there was a proposal. They wrote out questions. It really would be at very little cost to the district. They're able to participate here because it's all virtual, and it's pretty neat. It's also got like the Ohio partners. There's a lot more Ohio schools than you would think on it, and so I think a neat opportunity for our kids. So it would be your consideration to allow that to be a club.
Interesting.
And I think that's all I'll have.
Sounds good. All right. Any questions or comments?
Sounds
Okay,
good.
The other thing, the other thing that I wanted to bring up, actually there were two, but we can look at them as one. One is at our retreat, and as well as a couple years ago, we started the discussion about creating a board notebook. In our retreat, we said, yes, we wanted to go ahead with it, but I need to know specifics. Do you want me to contact OSBA, come up with a couple of dates, and get this going? The other thing is, Dan and I were part of a presentation that OSBA gave to the Career Center board at their retreat. What was it that Kip called it instead of a retreat? He called it a summit. Because we weren't going back, we were going forward. Anyway, they gave us a presentation on board docs, and I'm telling you, there is more power in this program than we have any idea about. And I propose, and in the purchase of our license to use board docs yearly, there is built into that a training session. They'll come in and show us how to use it. So what I would like to see is if we could create a time where we could maybe combine those two things. Do like, a supper meeting, started at like 5 and go conceivably till 9. If we could do one of those times. I'll call OSBA tomorrow and see what I can find out if that is what you would like me to do. But I'm telling you, I was so surprised by this, and I can't even remember all the stuff that they showed us. I know you can take notes. It was one of the things I tried at last meeting just to see if I could do it in that little talk box up there in the upper right-hand corner. Yep, you hit on that and you can put your annotations in for whatever it is. That's the one thing I thought was pretty cool.
It's the idea of using it for what we're paying for.
Right,
because
right.
there's Board Docs Pro, which we have, but there's a lighter
There's
version.
a lighter version
And I didn't know we had Pro,
that we've moved up to.
and thought we were using the previous one.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is you can embed videos, there's ways of trying to consolidate, increases transparency, everything's in one spot.
Yeah.
The idea of utilizing this is not just for us, but community
But
access.
community
Right.
too.
So we could load
It's-
the maps
it's
that we
really-
looked at today and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
They had one, the Career Center was asking, because every month we get paper there.
Okay.
And they were asking how to get old documents on, and they had one, she showed us one school district, I can't remember what state it was in, but they ended up hand-putting actually they photographed the oldest, that went back to 1817. Their minutes for their board meetings. It was incredible. You know, you're seeing all this old-timey writing that, you know, none of our kids could read, and half
It was
of
all
us could.
handwritten.
Nobody knows what
But it was, yeah. But it's really a powerful tool, and we're paying for this tool, and we're not using it. And so I feel like in order to be good stewards
Yeah.
of what we're buying, we
And
really
it's-
need
and
to be
since it's
trained in
included,
it.
it's not an extra fee to have the
Right,
training. It's-
right,
it's
that
part of
training
the
comes
membership.
in. So, you know, any of our admin who are using that would be welcome, so.
Makes sense.
Okay, I will see what I can do and report back to you on Tuesday.
Great.
Sounds
So
very good.
that's all I had. Anybody else have anything you want to talk about here? What about committee reports? Anything on committee reports?
We covered
Covered
our
everything?
committee.
Yeah, property
We
committee.
had our BAC meeting.
Yeah, that was nice.
Communications meets Friday.
Communications is Wednesday.
I thought the full BAC meeting was well attended.
It was.
And
Yeah.
that was exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
was- it was
7:30,
really good.
7:30 in the morning, and that table was full.
Yeah.
It was really, yeah, and Gabe did a great job, great showing. I was really proud of him. He was
did
like our
great.
show and tell here. He did a
Well,
great,
and I just, you
great
know,
job with all of our
I know we
partners.
talked about it at the BAC, but I think it just shows the level of commitment
Oh.
of the community here to the school and being
Yeah.
part, an active participant in
Yeah.
that, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. We've got a lot to be proud of in this community.
I have a question for Mr. Tudor that's not policy, or not a committee
Sure.
update. You've already updated us on how the transportation department's going. I believe at our last meeting you said it's getting a little bit tight on the staff, teachers, teaching staff as well. How is that going, just with teachers being out for themselves or kids that are quarantined?
It's definitely still a challenge. Many of our teachers are subbing during their planning periods. I mean, they are compensated, but they're doing it more, not for the money, but because they're willing to
Teachers
help.
would rather have the planning.
Some administrators are covering every once in a while. We've even told our administrators that central office staff will come and cover. We're managing for sure, but it's definitely a challenge. We do have building subs in every building where we really kind of find subs that are reliable and like working in a certain building, and we kind of ensure that they'll work there 4 days a week. And so, you know, what it does is we don't assign them a class. We basically wait till the morning of and we figure out what's not covered, which there's normally something not covered, and then we fill them in. Or if in a perfect world, every once in a while, they would move to a different building where there is, you know, a need. So we're managing because I think everyone has a commitment that we want to be and stay in school, but it's a challenge.
Is there a shortage of subs kind of across?
Yes.
at least- Yeah.
That came up today in our Career Center meeting, that nobody can find subs. They're spread out as thinly as possible, and there just aren't others stepping up, so.
Yeah.
We did raise our sub rates, you know, last year. They're, you know, that's always can be a continued conversation, but I don't know if it's just the money. It's just, you know, only so many people interested in that work, and then if they have a teaching license, there's so many needs for teachers in different ways. You know, most people are getting employment unless they kind of prefer the sub model. So.
Well, it's a hard job, and some
is.
subs may not feel comfortable going into a school with
Right.
a bunch of, with
Yep.
Right.
the whole population that's unvaccinated, just because they can't be.
Right.
So that's
Yep.
Right.
tough.
So, anything else for the good of the cause? Okay. We do have an executive session. So I need a motion to adjourn to executive session.
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, and are we going to, we're not, we can.
No action.
There is-
we're not gonna
there is
come-
no action.
There's no action, so we won't be coming back from that. So that's all, folks. That's what we've got this week.
Bugs
And we
Bunny.
will,
Hey, Amy's got
Call
a,
roll for
yeah,
executive
yeah,
session.
yeah, we'll get that.
Ms. Shantz?
Yes.
Dr. Knappich?
Yes.
Dr. Boone?
Yes.
Mr. Stabnezer?
Yes.
Mrs. Herman?
Yes. So we'll see you on Tuesday. Thanks for being with us
In the Performing Arts Center.
in the Performing Arts Center. Have a good evening.